Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek. This is the summer of Trek. This is a summer of reading Star Trek fiction. I'm part of the crew of the USS Revenant. We are captained by Vin at Revenant Reads, and we are on our third year of Book Trek, where we're reading Star Trek, watching Star Trek. We'd be talking about Star Trek if my co-host didn't think I smelled, but since they do, we don't even have live streams together. But I love talking about Star Trek. I think it's fantastic. And I look forward to Book Trek. I sort of put off Star Trek rereading and reading new stuff until then. And today was a reread. The book we're talking about today is this. It's Planet of Judgment by Joe Haldeman, who wrote All My Sins Remembered. He wrote The Forever War. He wrote good science fiction. This is not good science fiction. It has a beautiful original cover. And it was Water in the Desert when it came out in 1977 because there'd been James Blish wrote up the scripts for Star Trek. We talked about that last time into a bunch of books, and he wrote an original novel, Spock Must Die, and there were probably 3 or 4 other Star Trek books, and then there was this one. And so when it came out, I gobbled it up. I grabbed it right away and bought a copy, read it right away, but it's not very long. It's 150 pages soaking wet, and it isn't very good. And I don't know why. I knew that already. I've read this a couple of times. I always expect to find gems in these old Star Trek novels that are always there. They aren't always there. I would rather read bad old Star Trek fiction than that's still got heart and energy than read something like this. One of the reasons that's bad about it is that there are a bunch of plots. it's like the author wrote up the one that sort of starts it off, where the Enterprise encounters an Earth-like planet that is orbiting a tiny black hole, something the size of a marble. And that shouldn't be possible, of course, because that you're not getting any ambient light, you're not getting any heat from something like that, and the Enterprise wants to investigate it, and it turns out that there's a MacGuffin at the heart of that world that makes it possible. And that is a book on its own, if the author gave a damn. If the author was interested enough to dig into that and maybe flesh out characters, the author introduces a few characters that don't really, they get elaborate introductions, and then, like everything else in this book, Haldeman just drops them. He just forgets about them. Forgets to care about them. They're still there, but he forgets to care about them, and nothing revolves around them. And the same thing is true with that planet. That should be a whole book, and instead it morphs into another example of warring super races and super races that have fundamental things to learn about humanity. So they must put the crew of the Enterprise to a series of bizarre artificial tests. It reads very much like a bad third season episode of the original Star Trek, and makes no sense. One of the super races is so alien to anything that the humans on the Enterprise can teach it that they don't even know what making a decision is like. They need human help to learn how to make decisions, but they had to decide to need to do these tests, so they do know what decision making is like. It goes on like that. Even that plot is not really pursued. It just, you finish it just feeling like you've just been turning pages and there's been nothing there at all. Now, the principal complaint that I had about James Blish's numbered Star Trek books is that he didn't get the characters right, which is one of the things you have to care about in pastiche fiction because the characters are already established. If you don't get them right, you're failing the reader. They're not your characters, so you could fail to do them right. And that's the thing that I look for in Star Trek fiction. I want the characters to be done right. I don't want to ever get to a scene, especially an important scene, and have one of the characters, especially the big three, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, say or do something and have me just say, what? No, 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 no. No, that would never happen. That would take you right out of the book. And that doesn't happen quite so bad in Planet of Judgment as it does in James Blish's books, but it still happens. I'm not 100% sure that Joe Haldeman ever saw an episode of Star Trek when he wrote this book. I mean, he's a better writer. In my opinion, he's a better writer than James Blish. That's a controversy of another color. I think he's a better writer, and so although these aren't really you know, nailed on my characters, they're still good characters. So I wasn't as impatient as I was rereading those Blish books, but even so, Spock is not just an alien on board the Enterprise. He's a Superman. He can do anything that Haldeman needs him to do. McCoy is just a bad mood. Doesn't seem to be much more to him than that. And Kirk, I don't even know. I don't have any idea. I think I could probably pin down the heroic action hero molds that Haldeman was thinking of with Kirk, but none of it works really well. And the added characters, the ones that Haldeman makes up, never achieve anything like three-dimensionality, so that you're wondering why they're there at all. There's the second half of the book, especially the last quarter of the book, there's also supposed to be all sorts of stuff, all sorts of lore that adds to the backstory of our characters, which, keep in mind, when this book came out, there was precious little of that wasn't in fan fiction. There were fanzines that were happening by now. There were fanzines that were happening while the show was still on the air. And by fanzine, I don't mean a website, of course, because there was no internet. I mean a dot matrix printer. You would manually type up a Star Trek story, maybe a Star Trek poem, or something like that, and then you would print it. You would print it out a few times and mail it to people. And if word got out, and maybe you went to the gatherings that later on became called conventions, then maybe more people would want your zine, and so it would be bigger, and you would have a mailing list, and maybe they'd send you $1 to help with shipping and handling or whatnot. In those things, we were getting tons and tons of backstory for all the characters and all the secondary. Anyone who's ever appeared in an episode had a huge amount of fan fiction devoted to them by 1977. But in books, we were getting precious little. And so a lot of the stuff in here is, for McCoy especially, and also for Spock, is I guess breaking new ground. I don't know how much of it is considered canon, even in the Star Trek literary universe, but it's not compelling, and none of it is compelling. It was interesting to reread. I don't think I will ever reread it again, but it was interesting to reread for a lot of the reasons that I often find, these older science fiction novels that I read once when they came out. Like, for instance, as I've mentioned many times before, in Book Trek, you can judge the present of when the book was written by the future that you are seeing in the novel, because you will know you will know about the technology that the author knew about, and no more. The author won't be able to know about the technology that's 10 years from now, and that is true here as well. I mean, I've mentioned it many times before. The one detail in this book that really stuck with me the first time I read it, the second time I read it, is that there's one scene where Bones McCoy goes home and he goes to his computer and punches up the newspaper. Only he doesn't get the whole thing. He asks the computer to spit out news, comics, editorial, that sort of thing, but not the rest of the paper. And when I read that originally, I was flabbergasted. I thought, wouldn't that be incredible? First of all, I was disappointed because I was working in newspapers, and I thought, you should read the whole thing. And also, Bones McCoy would read the whole thing. Then I thought, wouldn't it be incredible if you could get that yourself and not have to go out and get the paper, but get it just printed off some sort of miraculous computer? And Joe Haldeman must have thought it was a neat idea too. It's in his book. He must have imagined it that way. The one thing he didn't imagine was a cell phone, where the news is right there and where you can curate it any way you like, where everybody can all the time. You don't need a gigantic boxy computer in your home. You can do it on the run. That didn't exist, and so it's not in this book. But that's not a whole lot to hang a novel on. This wasn't really a novel at all. It was a few essays, a few attempts at writing a novel, but Haldeman never bears down. He never really makes much of any of it. And as a result, it was a dramatic dud. So my Book Trek foray for today, not so good. I'm going to range a little bit more widely tonight or tomorrow. I have a guest here at Hyde Cottage, so I might not do any of it tonight. But next time we get together, I'm hoping for a hit. We shall see. I don't want this to be the summer of duds. So I'll wrap this up, and we will talk about some other book next time. Thank you, BookTube.